The Retroid Pocket Mini feels super premium and has enough power to play just about any PS2 or GameCube game that you could want, but it begs the question, does it even make sense to pick this up at $200 when for $20 more there is a bigger, slightly better version being offered from the same company? Well, that question also requires you to answer another question. Do you need your handheld to be mini? If the answer is yes, then I think that this actually makes a case for itself pretty easily. But I'm kind of worried about some of the slight drawbacks that this device has, but I spent a lot of time using it over the last 2 days, and I'm kind of curious if there's anyone out there that specifically is looking at this handheld just because of its size. Now, I didn't take this device outside of the house because, believe it or not, this is actually not my personal Retroid Pocket Mini. Mine is stuck somewhere in an airport, and I'm still waiting on it. This one was loaned to me by Derek over at the BASSDEREK YouTube channel. I'll leave it linked down below. Make sure you check out his videos. He has a far more in-depth video on the RP Mini and the RP5. This isn't something I wanted to go into super detail with because I am so late to making a video on this device, but I did want to get it in my hands and use it, and I'm pretty excited with what I've seen so far, but I'm still just kind of wondering what place it might have in my collection. Considering the fact that I have a Steam Deck OLED, which definitely covers emulation from room to room in the house, as well as numerous other devices that are capable of playing PS2 and GameCube games. However, I was just so fascinated by the specs that they were able to cram into this thing. I mean, it's a 960p AMOLED 3.7-inch display, a Snapdragon 865 with 6 gigabytes of RAM, and it's rocking Android 10, I believe, which is pretty impressive when you see something this size, especially when you get it in your hands. Now, a lot of us are watching videos on YouTube these days, and we're usually watching them on computer monitors or on our TVs while we're sitting on our couch, and that can sometimes give you the impression that a device is bigger than what it really is, but this device is truly small. I mean, it's not cramped. Using it doesn't feel super uncomfortable. There are some scenarios where I don't think it's the most comfortable, but in a general setting, it's light enough that I can move around my hand grip and it doesn't seem like it's cumbersome. The only thing that seems to bother me is when I'm playing games that require me to hold down a button like I am here in these racing games, having those buttons so close to the right thumbstick where I have to kind of hover around it isn't really the most ideal situation. But then again, it's not really super uncomfortable either. It's just something I'm not used to on something like a standard controller or some of the larger handhelds. And earlier I mentioned that this has only a 3.7-inch screen, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, that is way too small. And to be honest, I thought I was going to be in that camp. Most of the Anbernics that I enjoy using have at minimum a 4-inch screen, so I thought 3.7 inches was going to be a drastic step down. But I have to say, due to the fact that this can upscale pretty much every game that you're going to play with it to a good degree, and the fact that it's nice and sharp, it really doesn't look too bad as long as you're not playing a super heavy text game like JRPGs or something like that, and even then I think it'll be okay. I will have a more in-depth video on this device once I actually get my own personal unit, but the idea of setting up a device just to reset it and send it back just doesn't seem like a great idea right now, but I did want to use it and give my first impressions on it, and so far it's a pretty impressive little device. But what I keep going back to is that $200 price tag. I keep asking myself, do I really think this is a $200 device? Is it worth it at that price? And then I kind of have to remind myself where we were just like a year and a half ago with emulation and these handhelds. I mean, back then, anything in this price range would have required you to use all kinds of forks and dial all kinds of settings and tweaks and maybe use PAL versions of games to be able to get up to full speed. And even then, you'd be lucky if you saw maybe 30 or 40% of a PS2 or GameCube library be playable at like a full speed scenario. So, I mean, I think we're at a good price point with this device. It's just a bummer that for $20 more with the Retroid Pocket 5, you get so much more. And this isn't impervious to things like slowdown either. I'm playing Automodelista here. This is a game that is, for one, very difficult to play and not very enjoyable, but it tends to be in the upper end of GameCube when it comes to emulation, giving trouble to devices. And I do notice some sort of, audio spikes and lag when I go into the rumble strips, when I go off course here into the grass. However, it could be just this particular track because as I played other tracks, I did not notice this sort of slowdown, but it was recurrent on this track over and over again. So it wasn't necessarily like a shader compilation thing. and it wasn't due to running at too high of a resolution because I scaled all that back down to native. But I mean, that is a very rare case for this device. I think for 90% of games that run on the emulator, as long as the emulator supports it and there's not a specific reason why it wouldn't emulate well, it will do a pretty good job. Now, this is Tony Hawk's Underground. This is one that is notorious for having really bad frame time issues and stuttering and things like that. And I gotta say, even though you do have your, occasional hitch and hiccup here and there with this game, even on GameCube or PS2 versions, it plays pretty decent and it's a really fun game. But this D-pad, like I said before, is just, at least for me, it's a tad too small and a little too easy to make accidental presses. I think they could have solved this by having the D-pad stick out from the shell a little bit more. But I mean, like I said, for 90% of use cases, it's just not going to be a problem. However, I do play a lot of Tony Hawk games on my handhelds, and it's kind of a disappointment. But to flip that on the other side of things, I am a really big fan of the joysticks that Retroid has been using in their handhelds. I'm glad to see that Ambernick is finally kind of adopting something similar, but even the toppers on these particular joysticks are extremely comfortable. Now we're going to play a little bit of Freak Style. This is actually made by the same studio that made SSX Tricky, which is one of my favorite games. And this game requires really precise joystick input, especially around corners and things like that with speed. And so I like to kind of use this as a test of how close to a native experience you're getting with a joystick. And to me, I would say that this gets a full pass, which is really good because I enjoy playing games like this on my handhelds quite a lot. And I did notice in this game there were a few stutters, but I believe they were shader compilation stutters because the next time I went around the track, it didn't seem like it happened again. But I want to thank you guys for watching. I know this isn't the typical style of video that I do on this channel, but there's so many releases happening this year. It gets a little exhausting reviewing every handheld super in depth. And there's already such great coverage on this handheld out there that you can already watch. So I just kind of wanted to give you a more opinion-based video. So if you like this, make sure you subscribe so you can see when I post the full-length video as well as the video on the Retroid Pocket 5.